I think it's pretty common that as a kid, we all were kind of afraid of the dark. I remember having nightmares or going to my mom's room to tell her how much I hated sleeping in the dark because I knew that I would get some scary dreams. But what if there was a reason to be afraid of the dark? What if your nightmares and your worst fears came to life? Well, if you're asking that same question as me, then I'm pretty sure you would be interested in a little game called Alan Wake. Hi everyone, it's Sir UD here, and today we'll be discussing an older game of sorts, Alan Wake. Now, I got quite a bit of flack for telling people that I have never even touched this game or even heard of this game until the second one was announced. So recently, I decided I would give it a shot because I thought the second one looked pretty good and interesting. Recently also, I played Control for the first time. And even though I didn't agree with some of the story choices and stuff that they went with, I overwhelmingly enjoyed my experience with it. And to no one's surprise, I felt the same way about Alan Wake. Let's start from the very beginning. We begin with Alan Wake, an author who is best known for his best-selling books in crime fiction. Alan Wake has been struck with writer's block for 2 years. For those of you who don't know what writer's block is, it's basically where you can't think of what to write about. We instantly jump into a scenario where Alan ends up hitting a hitchhiker with his car. With our car crashed, we go and investigate the man that we just hit, just to find out that he's mysteriously gone. We make our way to a lighthouse in the distance to try and get some help. On our way there, we get a basic tutorial of the game and one of the basic mechanics of the game as well. The enemies in this game have this weird darkness shield, which makes them immune to pretty much anything that we use to them. The only way to get rid of these shields is to shine light on them. The main way you'll be doing this is with a handy dandy flashlight that you are given in the beginning of the game. There's other ways, of course, of doing it, but your flashlight's your best friend at this game. After shining them for a couple seconds, their shields will disappear and they'll become vulnerable to any attacks. Anyways, we make our way to the lighthouse and then we get woken up by our wife, Alice. This lovely couple is heading out to a small town named Bright Falls. Both of them with the very different intentions of going on this vacation. Alan thinks that they're just going on a simple vacation away from the fame, while Alice is trying to spark some creativity to hopefully break his writer's block. Once they get to town, they go to a small little diner looking for a man named Carl Stuckey in order to pick up their cabin keys, which they'll be staying. As Alan makes his way to the back of the diner, he finds this creepy ass lady in a black dress. She informs Alan that Carl couldn't make it and hands him the keys and gives the couple's directions to the cabin. Let's start here for a second, okay? If I were to go to a back of a diner and it be like nearly completely pitch black and a woman in a black funeral dress walks up to me and gives me keys, that's my first red sign. I'm getting the fuck out of there. There's no reason to be there. It's such an obvious red flag to me that, you know what? They kind of deserve what happens to them in this game. Like, you're just being stupid for no reason. It's like one of those horror movie scenarios where one of the people in the group is like, let's split up. And they all split up and she's like the first to die. Like, how could you not think that through? But even with these signs, they go to the cabin. When they arrive, Alice reveals to Alan that she had bought him a typewriter and was trying to get him to spark some creativity and was hoping that the change of scenery would inspire something in him. Alan, however, did not take this very well. He ends up storming out of the house. And by this point of the story, for about an hour or so max, you could tell that Alan's kind of a dick to people. He kind of goes off in the diner on a woman, is just like, yeah, whatever. And it's just kind of rude to Alice for no reason. She seems to be a loving and caring wife, and he just pushes her off. He storms out of the house knowing that his wife would not follow because she's afraid of the dark. He gets all the way down to the bridge before he notices the power's out. Suddenly, he hears Alice screaming and races towards the house. Once he gets inside, he notices that Alice has fallen into the lake, and we jump in after her. All of a sudden, we get bright flashes and then wake up in a crashed car. This definitely caught me off guard. 1 second we were at the lake, and the next we were in a crashed car with a eyebrow busted open. Alan, now confused, starts making his way to a nearby gas station to use the phone. Of course, in good old video game fashion, there's no simple way to this gas station. Alan must go through the forest. And in the forest, he finds a paper on the ground. He picks this up and finds out that it's a manuscript for a story that Alan called The Departure. This was a story that Alan was planning on writing, but never released it. This acts as one of the collectibles you'll find throughout the game. But not just that. If you go in and read them, they'll actually give you some information on the story and can even spoil certain parts that happen later in the story. I think it's a great way of world building and showing you that this is truly a mix of different medias. Alan goes through the forest and he fights another one of these shadowy enemies that he calls the Taken. Eventually, he gets to the gas station and realizes that it's been a week since he jumped into the lake after Alice. Not too long after that, Sarah, the sheriff, shows up and Alan tells her that his wife has been missing at a cabin at the lake. Sarah reveals to him that this cabin has been gone since the 1970s. We get a flashback from about 3 years ago, which explains that Alice is afraid of the dark, which we kind of knew already, but this gives a much deeper explanation of it. Alan, trying to help her overcome his fear, tells her a story of how, when he was a kid, he was also afraid of the dark, to the point where he wasn't able to sleep. His mom gave him a light switch that she named the clicker, which would make all the monsters go away. We switch back to present day. Alan is getting patched up at the station, and while Alan was being questioned, he notices that he gets a phone call. When he picks up the phone, he hears Alice at first, but then it switches to a guy, a kidnapper of sorts. He tells Alan to meet him at a place called Lover's Lake. While leaving the station, our agent Barry, one of my favorite characters in this game, shows up. After a few events and a hassle of getting there, we make our way to Lover's Peak. The kidnapper reveals to us that if we want to see Alice again, we must get him all the manuscripts. We end up getting into a little fight with the kidnapper, which results in us both falling off the edge of a cliff. Neither of them critically injured, of course, and Barry calls letting us know that he's in trouble. Of course he is, and we go back to the cabin where we rented and help him out. The kidnapper then calls us and let us know that we have 2 days to get him these manuscripts, or else Alice is dead. Alan tries to see if he could maybe make up the story, but is unsuccessful due to his writer's block. Then Rose, the waitress at the diner, calls us and informs us that she has the rest of these manuscripts. From the start of this phone call, you could kind of tell that something was off. But then the camera starts to pan over and reveals to us that next to her is the woman in the black funeral dress. In this part of the story, we don't get a whole lot of things revealed to us. We go to Rose's trailer, she drugs us with coffee, and we end up losing another day. But before we leave the trailer, we notice that some sort of trauma has taken its toll on Rose. She seems kind of off and is more of like a nut job compared to what she was. Like normally she was like an excited fan, but now she's like cradled up, she's shaking back and forth, like completely lost it. As we're heading outside, there's an FBI agent named Agent Nightgale. He's kind of a dick, but at this point in the story, you can kind of get where he's coming from. I mean, it's a little suspicious to have 2 men in a trailer and have this typical girl just going crazy and nuts and acting like something extremely bad happened to her. He ends up opening fire on Alan, which manages to jump off the side of the hill and rolls down safely into the forest. A lot of this mission is running away from the cops. Eventually, he gets another phone call informing him that he needs to meet the kidnapper at Mirror's Peak, or Alice dies. I really don't think he needs to keep throwing this threat around. I mean, we get the memo, dude. We get it. Alan agrees and makes his way there. Once he reaches the agreed location, the kidnapper is screaming and crying. He's screaming to not be killed by this darkness thing. He reveals to you, surprise, surprise, that he never had Alice in the first place. Then, a tornado of dark presence swoops him up and kills him before launching us off the cliff as well. We get flashes of Alice before being saved by a mysterious figure. After getting weird flashes, we get some more weird flashes of Dr. Hartman the man that Alice had talked to about helping us. He was drugging us up. Eventually, we fully wake up in pretty much in a psychiatric ward. We spend some time here, and eventually we meet these two brothers who were rock stars. They wrote this song called Lady of the Light and give you a secret note to head back to their farm. Some things take a turn at the clinic, and Alan ends up making his way out. We meet up with Barry, and we make our way out to the farm. When we get to the farm, we find this cool stage. We probably have my favorite moment of the game, where like lights are going off, you're just shooting shit. They give you a bunch of grenades, pump action shotgun, a super powerful flashlight, and you just go ham. It's an amazing part of this game. After that, we make our way to the farmhouse, and once we arrive, we finally listen to that song. Alan ends up figuring out that the song is about a girl named Cynthia Weaver, a girl who wrote about the tragedy that happened at the cabin in the 70s. She mentioned a couple that was staying there at the cabin when an eruption happened that collapsed the cabin. Thomas Zane and Barbara Jagger. Thomas was a writer, just like Alan. Anyways, Alan and Barry decide that it would be best to wait for the morning to pursue Cynthia. So, what do they decide to do in this meantime? Drink, of course. Gotta have a little party for... What we didn't know is that being drunk would be one of the best things to happen to us. We unlock the memories that we had lost during the week that we blacked out. We find out the truth. When Alan jumped in after Alice in the lake, the woman in the black dress had pulled him out and told Alan that she was dead, but that the lake had some magical capabilities and that if Alan wrote a story, he could save Alice. This was in fact a lie. She wanted Alan to write a story that made the dark presence stronger. Somehow, Alan knew of this and knew that he couldn't save Alice, and so subconsciously, he wrote in Thomas Zane to save him. That's when we wake up at the car crash. Now, we end up waking up from this drunk sleep scenario thing to find Agent Nightingale with a gun into our head and arresting us. As we wake up in a jail cell, we get some flashing visions of Cynthia Weaver before Agent Nightingale comes to us and basically antagonizes us. He comes in with Sarah, who is seemingly arguing with him because throughout the whole case, he hasn't been very sober. That, and he fired back at an innocent civilian earlier, so she's pretty pissed about that. Nightingale tells them that he has all the evidence he needs to lock Alan away for good, especially since he has the manuscripts. Out of nowhere, Alan starts getting these weird flashes of light, different type of flashes that we've gotten before, and ends up collapsing Alan to the floor in pain. Sarah comes into the cell and helps Alan. Nightingale, seemingly irritated by the situation, just calls it all a bluff. However, he recognizes this and starts to flip through the manuscripts. Out of nowhere, the darkness swoops him up and kills him. At this point, we fill Sarah in our situation, since now she has seen some of the crazy stuff and it would be much easier to explain after that. We make a plan. Alan and Sarah go get the emergency helicopter, and Barry stays here at the station to warn certain people. Of course, just like many things in this game, it never goes to plan. We end up having to go save Barry, which means he tags along with us throughout the rest of this mission. And we get to the helicopter, where you kind of have to defend it like a zone capture in like Call of Duty or something like that. Once this happens, we get to the power plant, where Cynthia has been staying. After some shenanigans, we end up getting to a room called the well-lit room. I know, very clever. We end up finding out that Thomas Zane had wrote Alan into his story 30 years ago. He's the one who wrote about the clicker, which turns out to be the key of defeating the dark presence. Alan finds out that if he reaches the lake and flips the clicker, he can end up getting back to that cabin again, defeating the dark presence and finishing the story. The final chapter of the game. We start off with a flashback to 2 years ago. We wake up with a hangover and end up making our way to our living room to watch some TV. The night before, we were on a TV interview show. Let me just say, I love when Remedy has these live action sequences in their game. I think it's super unique and super cool. And especially with a game that has a novel story and has some like movie elements into it, it's super cool, dude. Definitely, probably my other favorite part of this game was that Alice comes home and they kind of get into an argument, but then we get to see this softer more emotional side to Alan. You could see that he's worn down and tired of the publicity and this fame-like lifestyle. He just wants to get away, which is why we go to Bright Falls. Now, back to current times, we decide to go to the lake on our own since we had been putting everybody in danger from the beginning of the game. The dark presence, of course, gets super pissed and starts throwing shit at us. Didn't know it could do that, but after some events, we make our way there. We end up beating the dark presence and making our way back upstairs to finish our story. Alan mentions that in the story, there must be a balance of light and dark. As he's writing, we get to see Alice swimming back to the shore of the cabin, but Alan is nowhere to be seen. In fact, this doesn't look like the cabin that we've really been to. It's much foggier and darker and almost more like Silent Hill, kind of like. You can obviously tell that this is somewhere different, almost like a different reality or planes of sorts. And then we get to see Rose holding a lantern at the Deer Fest, which had been mentioned briefly throughout the game that they were having. It's kind of this yearly local festival thing that the whole town kind of gets together and does stuff with. Rose standing outside holding the lantern, but behind her in the diner window is the woman in black. Then the game pans towards Alan as he mentions that it's not a lake, it's an ocean. And then the game ends with you hearing Alice telling you to wake up. After playing Control and going into this game, I had kind of an expectation built up for Alan Wake. I don't really know if that was a fair expectation, considering that this game was, I think, 9 years before Control came out, but I really enjoyed this game. Like, even today, I still had a blast playing it. Sure, I can make some complaints about, the frame rate or, the 2010 graphics, but I don't really think that's fair, The game can be a great game without looking stunning. Like, shit, like indies are a great example of this. Hollow Knight, Hades, BioShock is one that comes to mind. The Arkham games, they were stunning in their time, but they're not necessarily the best graphically. So that's where I sit with that sentiment. I'm not gonna lie, when it gets to cutscenes, it gets a little hard to watch. It's not unbearable, but you could definitely tell the frame rate is not good. But that's not what carries this game. What carries this game is the story. I mean, what a unique way to tell a video game story. The blend of it being like a book, put in like a video game format, and then having the live action sequences with the TV interview. You see Alan on the TV multiple times that give you little hints of the story. You get a podcast of what's going on in Bright Falls. Like, there's so much different things that going on in the game that give you information that it's so good, dude. It's incredible. Even to this day, when it comes to the game itself and how it plays, I really like the flashlight mechanic. It's not super hard to think about, and it's not a groundbreaking discovery. I mean, you're shooting a flashlight at dark enemies, but I don't think anything had really been done up to this point. And so it helped boosted it. Not only that, but it feels super good to play. Like, it's not one of those janky systems that was put in last minute. You could tell that the game was built with that first, and then some of the other stuff later. I will say, even though Alan Wake says it's an action game, it very much feels like a horror game. Like, more than what Control did. Control had some elements, but this feels like a true horror game. The only reason I think that it wasn't considered one was the ammo economy and them being generous with resources. But I'm really glad that they really go into the horror element in the second game, which, let me say, super fucking excited to play that game now. I've had it for a couple days. I got it halfway through playing Alan Wake, and I can't wait to play it. I also really appreciate the whole manuscript thing. Like I reiterated earlier, it's the game's main collectible system, but it acts more as that. It gives you story. It gives you, if you get all the manuscripts, it's almost like a book. Like, literally, you can read it from front to end. There's a specific point in, I think it was episode 2 of the game, where it had spoiled that Alan and Barry end up in jail drunk, and then Nightingale walks up to them. So when I read that, I kind of pushed it away. I didn't want to read more because I wanted to play the game, but it's something I'm super appreciative of. And you don't really see much games giving you the option to spoil the story for yourself if you want. It's super cool and it's really well done. You know, this game came out in 2010, and honestly, I would still recommend this game to anybody now. I mean, why wouldn't I? It goes on sale all the time, and it comes with the game and both DLCs for like $10, dude. That, and if you have PlayStation, it came out months ago. That's half the reason I'm playing it now is because of the second game and because I got it for free. But if you're like me and you put off playing iconic games or just, your backlog is so filled, I have 100% confidence that this game would genuinely surprise you. Like, I know it got pretty good reviews when it came out, considering I still hear about the game today. And when the sequel came out, it was like one of the biggest announcements of that year. But if you can get past the old graphics and the frame rate, this would 100% be a great game for you to check out. Well, guys, that's all I got for you guys today. This has been Sir UD, and I'll see you all later.